Hey, welcome to a car that you haven't seen very much on the channel, my 1968 Mercury Cougar. I haven't shown it much because it's basically a completed project. I spent about 8 years of my life perfecting it, at least as close as I could get to it. And I wanted to keep it very factory original. So one area that I never completed was some way to listen to music. Because I put back in the original AM radio from 1968, which looks fantastic. It looks totally factory, it is. But it doesn't even work, and even if it did, there's not that much on AM to listen to. So I've kind of been debating what I want to do for that. I don't want to put in an aftermarket head unit that clearly doesn't look correct in the car, because I've spent so much effort to make it look factory. But there is a solution. So here's what we're going to be installing. It's the same exact radio as what's in it, but with a major difference. The internals have been completely gutted and replaced with modern electronics. You can see all these wires. We have enough speaker outputs for 4 speakers at 45 watts each, 4 ohms. We have an original plug for power and illumination. There's even an amplifier turn-on line or power antenna, which I won't be using, but it's cool to have. There's even a USB dongle, so you can plug in a flash drive with a bunch of MP3s on it, or you can even plug in your phone and charge it with this at 2 amps. Pretty sweet. Still has the original antenna input, but there's also an input for a microphone to make phone calls with. And it can do everything. It's got Bluetooth, so you can connect your phone wirelessly and stream your favorite streaming apps or podcasts or whatever. So it really does everything that a modern radio can do while being inside of an original factory correct 1968 radio shell. These updated electronics come from a company called Aurora Design, and while you can't buy them as an individual, they have a list of approved installers that you can send your radio to and convert just about any vintage car radio into modern electronics. I used Gary Tayman out of Florida. All these controls still work. You can still use the preset buttons, still use the volume and tuning knobs and everything, so it's really the perfect solution. The good news is I knew this day would come, so I actually installed speakers all throughout the car. They're already pre-wired and ready to go, so if I can find the wires, and hopefully my past self labeled them, but we should be able to just hook everything up and have tunes. So this original AM radio would have come with only one speaker, and that's up above in the dash. This was just a mono radio, very simple. That's all you get. If you were fancy in 1968 and ordered the optional AM/FM stereo or an AM 8-track, you would have gotten stereo speakers in the kick panels if you ordered a Cougar, or if you bought a Mustang, they'd be in the doors. Because of this, all the reproduction kick panels are for the Mustang and they don't have the speaker perforations that Cougar panels came with. So this is something I'm going to have to deal with. And while rear speakers were only available as a dealer option, the factory did pre-cut holes for 6x9s in the rear package tray. If you bought these rear speakers, they would come with baffles underneath, as well as some nice grills that would go over the package tray. I've gone for a more hidden approach so you can't actually see the rear speakers. For the kick panel speakers, this is easiest to do with the fenders off so you can cut the hole in the sheet metal, and I use some generic plastic pods to seal them off from the weather, similar to what the factory did. Lastly, I had replaced the original mono dash speaker with a new dual voice coil speaker that basically acts like a stereo speaker with separate inputs for left and right. Anyway, now that we're up to speed on the speaker situation, let's get the old radio out, starting with the nut on the rear support bracket. Next, we can just undo the 4 screws that hold the bezel to the car and carefully slide out the radio and unplug all the wires. Okay, old radio's out. That was pretty straightforward. I'm going to be swapping over this bezel and knobs to the new one, which is easy. All we have to do is pull these off. They pull straight off, be gentle. And then we just undo that big nut. I think it's 9/16 if I remember right. Use a deep socket and the bezel will come right off and we can swap it on to the new one. On the right inner knob, don't forget this plastic piece which blocks the factory fader function. It's extremely rare, but if you did get the dealer installed rear speakers, they would have installed this fader control behind the knob that ties into a special wiring harness that ties the front and rear speakers together. We don't need this with our updated radio because there is a virtual fader control, which I'll show you later. But before we can put this thing through its paces, I'll need to take off this new wiring harness and connect all my speaker wires. Since I basically have 4 front speakers between the dash and kick panels, I'm going to wire them together like so. With everything else done, I put a ring terminal onto the ground wire so I could use the nut on the radio support bracket for a ground. I like that Mr. Taman spliced back on the factory power plug so I can just plug it straight back into my factory harness. One little detail before I put this new radio in is to swap out the incandescent light bulb for a LED, which I had installed along with all the other dash lights when I did this restoration. Okay, got everything wired up. Hopefully I did it right. But now I should be able to just bring this in, plug in the wiring. There we go. And then plug the antenna in. Sure everything's routed in there, and hopefully slot this back in. Get that back stud back in. Can you even see what I'm doing? Probably not. So before I tighten that back one, I'm going to go ahead and put these screws back in. Now I have this ground wire from the harness, so I'm going to put that on the back stud. Okay, back mount is back on, the ground is on, everything's wired up. Should be good to give it a test. Let's reconnect the battery and see what happens. Let's turn it on accessory, and then oh, that's radio. It's working. That's actually on a station. Wow. I gotta see if all the speakers are working.
Get rid of the weeds, most of which, if they were edible.
Sounds like it. It was around this time I realized it sounded like crap. I went down the rabbit hole of investigating the problem, and I found out that not only was one of my rear speakers blown, but so was the under dash speaker. So I went down the path of going to buy new rear speakers, installing them, which means I had to take the back seat out to get the package tray out. It was a whole thing. Also, part of the troubleshooting was to take the radio out to check all the wiring, take out the sill plates so I could pull the kick panels and inspect those speakers. And then I had to unhook the dash speaker, and I'm going to have to deal with this later because it's pretty hard to get to. But at least for now I have 4 working speakers and I can move on to the next phase of this project. Okay, so for my next challenge I have to figure out what to do with these aftermarket kick panels. They're missing the holes for speakers, and there are some aftermarket ones that come with speaker pods, but they stick out externally and are very obvious and don't look factory at all. So I'm trying to go for a more stealthy, hidden thing where you can't tell anything's been modified. So I reached out to my friends at West Coast Classic Cougar and asked them, do you guys have any okay enough used original panels that I can use as templates to drill the holes? It's okay if there's cracks or whatever. So they sent me these. And you know what? There's a couple cracks, but they're pretty decent actually. I think I can actually fix these cracks and paint these to match my interior. And that's probably a way better option than trying to drill all these tiny little holes. I think I'm gonna try to do that. Thanks, guys. One other little detail that the original ones have that the aftermarket ones don't is these little bosses for the screws where it mounts to the car. So I set about fixing the cracks with a couple different types of JB weld meant for plastic. Cleaned them up as best I could and used some quality SEM products that I still had left over to prep and paint them with a flexible interior paint that matches my interior. It turned out pretty nice. Then I could install some new insulation on the back and install them in the car. And since these have the original mounting holes, I could line them up with the holes that were already in my car and screw them in. And lastly, I could put the shiny sill plates back on, which are a little bit of a struggle. The fit is not as good as the original aluminum ones, but the stainless ones are way shinier. Okay, it's about 3 weeks later. Nothing has changed, as you can tell, but everything's nicely buttoned up. I got those kick panels done. I got 4 working speakers, just as I said, disconnected the dash speaker for now. So let's run through some of the features of this thing. Since we have limited controls, we have to use the knobs for a lot of different things. So obviously we turn it on. Hey, we get some nice radio. We can use the tuner. The other cool thing is it locks onto stations really well. You don't really have to search around too much. So the tuner works really nicely. So this is FM right now, which obviously we didn't have before. But if I want AM, I just have to turn it off and back on quickly. So now we're on AM. What is all this? Hey. Okay, I can't get copyrighted music on here, alright, so I'm going to turn that off real quick. So, the basic package when you get one of these conversions is just for the radio portion of it. So you get a really good quality AM FM with the 45 watts per channel outputs and all the nice modern conveniences. It has a voice assistant that tells you what's going on because otherwise there's no display, right? So it would be hard to tell what you're doing. So the USB and Bluetooth module is an optional extra, but I think it's well worth it because having Bluetooth just opens up everything you could ever want to listen to. But first of all, let's run through some of the basic controls for how do you adjust balance and fader. So this inner knob is typically your tone knob, which still works. So that makes it more bassy, and this way makes it more trebly. All right, I'll recenter it. If you move it 3 times fast to the right, fader adjust. 2 times fast to the right, that's all the way to the rear. This is all the way to the front. And then if you leave it for a second, fader set. You hear that? It says fader set. So it tells you what's going on. So to set the balance, you twist the tone knob twice quickly to the left. Balance adjust. And you hear it say balance adjust. And you turn it back and forth to change it. That's obviously right. And that's left. And you feel a little notch in the middle. So just leave it and it'll set. Balance set. And that's pretty much it. So it's pretty easy. I guess I can show you how to pair a Bluetooth device, huh? So first we have to make it discoverable. So we twist the volume knob to the right twice. Bluetooth ready to pair. Okay, did you hear that? And then it just popped up on my phone, Aurora Design. Boop. Just like that. Pairing completed. Bluetooth connected. Sure. Now we're connected. We can listen to whatever. So I'll bring my music back up. And as soon as I hit play, it'll switch. How cool is that? Oh man. Yeah, yeah, so once you set it up, it's very easy to use and does everything, so pretty sweet. So the USB part of things, it's not the most useful part of it, but it is cool. They did provide a USB stick, which is nice, so you can load it up with whatever tunes you want. The only problem is it's very limited in how you can navigate this thing while it's playing. All you can do is skip ahead or back in songs. But if you just load this up with a bunch of random favorite songs and just let it go, skip when you want to, yeah, it's fine. So the only way to switch back to radio is to physically unplug it. And now we're back to radio.
Bluetooth connected.
And again, it's discovered my phone, which is cool. Once you link your phone to the radio, it's going to recognize it every time you step inside the vehicle and turn it on, which is really nice. You don't have to pair it every time. It seems to be pretty reliable. Of course, this comes with all the directions you could ever need. I've barely scratched the surface of what all the features are. It's a nice rundown of all the functions of the knobs. There's a lot of different things you can do with different twists of the knob. It's pretty clever. The only thing left to do now is go cruising. I think I'm going to wrap it up here. If I was to go through all the features and functions this thing has, this would be a long and boring video. Definitely not the cheapest option out there. There's plenty of decent looking aftermarket radios that fit in this slot and have knobs and kind of look vintage. But if you're a bit of a stickler like me, or your car is special and you want to keep it looking factory, this is the best way to go. The only problem is that dash speaker blowing up. It did go through a lot of dust and debris during the restoration, so that probably killed it. But I might do another video where I disassemble the whole dash to get to it and replace it. I also have a clock to install, which is neat. So this is not going to be the last Cougar video, most likely. Next time you may see me get back to work on the Miata. I don't know. I just kind of do whatever I feel like at the time, so we'll see. But it should be good. Thanks for coming along for the ride. Hit some of the buttons down below, and see you in the next one.